we will move now to Lebanon, where things are escalating still at a slow pace. The Israelis are saying about Lebanon, still, they continue to say that it's delimited, that it's targeted, but they continue to move more troops up there. They moved another division up yesterday. That there's now 4 divisions on the border, but their progress has been extremely slow across the border. 1 week ago, when we were doing our show, we reported that 9 Israeli soldiers were killed from the 98th Division that had just come up from Gaza. 6 Special Forces soldiers were killed in their first movement across, we'll call it the border. This is called the Blue Line. Israel has no borders, but it's sort of the understood border. And Israel went across by a few hundred feet and got hit immediately. 9 soldiers killed, 30 casualties. Interestingly, Hezbollah fired mortars onto the staging area, not at the medevac helicopter, but at the staging area where all the troops were, which is something that was interesting to note because Qassam hasn't done that. And we've noted that throughout the whole war, not just not targeting the medevac helicopter, but Qassam doesn't target the medevac staging areas either. In this case, we see Hezbollah doing that already early in the war. Hezbollah operations have increased from 8 to 12 was the sort of climbing the escalation ladder over previous months throughout the summer, 8 to 12 operations a day. Those have tripled. Now we're seeing operations of 34 a day throughout this week, many days with 20 plus operations, qualitative operations, and 34 as the high. So, and we also saw for the first time this week rockets on Haifa. Hezbollah has not been targeting civilian areas. They have targeted evacuated Israeli villages and settlements in the north. But they have, and that's the reason you don't ever hear of the Israeli death toll in the battle in the north, because there's only been, you can count them on one hand, the number of Israelis killed, and it's not even clear they're civilians. There was the incident in Majd al-Shams with 12, where 12 teenagers were killed playing soccer. Still not clear who carried out that operation. But if you take that operation out, you have enough, you only have Israelis killed that you can count on one hand in the entire civilians. The soldiers have been killed, but Hezbollah targets military sites, and I'll get to more of that. But this week, they started firing on Haifa, which is something Nasrallah said would happen when the Israelis fired on Beirut. And so they have definitely fired on Beirut, and this is now the first time we're seeing possibly an escalation into firing into Haifa that I think a lot of people were wondering when that would happen. There's been 3,000 rockets since September 23rd, according to the Israelis. And again, they haven't been able to move into Lebanon. They only moved inches, meters, a couple hundred meters in some cases, depending on the geography. But as Naim Qassem, the deputy of Hezbollah, he gave a speech yesterday, and he said that the meters that they gain are meaningless because our fighters aim for direct engagement with the enemy, whether on the front line or beyond, which means that the front line is not set up to put up a defense immediately on the front line. That's not the way the hybrid warfare, guerrilla warfare, or a military defending a mountainous region would do. You want the Israelis to move into your ambushes that are set up, and the Israelis haven't done that yet. So we'll see if this is the full-scale ground invasion of Lebanon. The Israelis are not saying that it is. They seem to be always in all of their communications. It's very different than what we heard about destroying the Qassam brigades, destroying Hamas, eliminating the threat. They're not using any of that language when they're talking about Lebanon. They're talking about delimited, targeted, and degrading. Hezbollah with the vague idea that they can get this 30-kilometer buffer zone that Hezbollah's de facto created, a security zone inside Israel. Israel intends to attempt to try to get that area back. If we look at number 21 here tomorrow, we can see Hezbollah firing on the Mossad headquarters again at 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. This is the headquarters of Unit 8200. the signals intelligence unit that would have been involved in Nasrallah's assassination, and Mossad also involved in Nasrallah's assassination. We saw this on October 1st, these Fadi rockets that I showed you a couple shows ago and described, multiple rocket launch system, a bit heavier than the Katyushas that they fire and longer distance, and a heavier warhead, significantly heavier warhead, 100 kilo warheads being fired on the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. And as I said, this is one of 3,000 rockets fired since the last week of September, and according to the Israeli military, 10,000 rockets since October 8th. Hezbollah doesn't tell us the number of rockets that they have fired. They just tell us the number of rocket operations carried out. That the Israelis say 10,000 rockets. And then, of course, there's been hundreds of drones that we have watched as well. And the targets of these have been, Hezbollah released their list. There's been 3,300 Hezbollah operations. 1,570 are against border posts, like IDF border posts, 500 against IDF barracks, 300 against IDF outposts, and 180 against military bases and 3 military airports. Those are the Ramat David air base that we've seen be hit before. And if we look at number 22, we can see that the beginning of this ground operation into Lebanon, they're using these suicide tank bombs that we've seen in Gaza. You can see here one rigged up in a village that straddles the border. This is not inside Lebanon. But they're using it, and you can see the barrel there that is used for the ammonium nitrate that is the main charge in these suicide tanks, and they're remotely operated tanks that are used to clear intersections, and it's just remarkable to see these. They obviously drove them all the way up to, put them on trucks and brought them all their suicide tanks up to Lebanon, and intend to use these in some manner in Lebanon. We'll see. We'll keep following that story. If we look at 23, you could see a drone swarm. This is one of the first times we've seen. I brought you this video because it's one of the first times we've seen them fire them off the rack. These Shahed drones fired off a rack, and these were aimed at an artillery position at Neve Ziv camp, which is in northern Israel, and an Israeli soldier was killed and 2 others were wounded on the border, in an artillery unit on the border. Again, it's tough to always pinpoint exactly which ones they're claiming. They claim them days later. So obviously, they don't claim them at all in some cases, but 2 more were seriously wounded in that. And again, this is part of 3,200 Hezbollah operations. 760 of them have been anti-tank operations that we've seen against armored vehicles, 140 against armored vehicles, and 500 of them against technical equipment that we've been showing you for a year on this program. Hezbollah says they've carried out 1,300 rocket barrages, so that gives you an idea. 1,300 rocket barrages. The Israelis say there's 10,000 rockets, and that makes sense because we have multiple rocket launchers. So we have an agreement in general between the sides telling the truth. And one of the most dangerous things that Hezbollah does is tell the truth. They tell their truth about their commanders. When they were killed, they put out their martyr posters and where they were from immediately, which is a very dangerous move to do when Israel's trying to create a data map, trying to create coordinates on a network and understand who's being assassinated and what this network is built on. The honesty of Hezbollah in these operations and their information operations ended up being dangerous. But you can see between the Israeli acknowledgement of the number of rockets and the Hezbollah attacks that they're telling the truth in these operations. They're not hiding it. So 500 against technical equipment, 6, as we've watched all 6 Hermes, 450 and 900, the 2 large Hermes flagship drones of Elbit have been downed. And of course, there's a de facto 30-kilometer buffer zone. Israel calls it a security zone when it was inside Lebanon. They call them buffer zones when they're inside Gaza. And now, for the first time in Israel's history, the security zones are inside the state of Israel, and the one in the north is de facto 30 kilometers deep. I also wanted to just bring you some from the Islamic resistance in Iraq, because they have upped their operations too. I've shown these the last couple of weeks, but you can see they're saluting the assassination of Nasrallah. They're firing drones, and they're firing one-way explosive-laden attack drones at Israeli bases in the Golan, in the Jordan Valley, and at Eilat as well, at the port in the south. And they're also firing long-range cruise missiles. And Abu Ubaidah, and last week, the 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in an operation last week. It took the Israelis 3 days to acknowledge that that happened. Then they acknowledged 2 soldiers were killed and more than 20 wounded. 24 were wounded in a drone attack on a Golani brigade base in the Golan Heights. And Abu Ubaidah noted that on that day and said, "We salute our brothers in the Iraqi Islamic resistance in Iraq for supporting our Palestinian people in the face of Zionist aggression, and we bless their qualitative operations that target with drones occupation forces in the Golan, leaving dead and wounded, which carries a message to the occupation that your persistence and your aggression will bring you more losses, more setbacks, until you retreat from our land." And yesterday in Abu Ubaidah's speech, he spoke to the support fronts by saying, "The fronts are fighting the enemy directly today, engaging with it, inflicting heavy losses on it, and dealing it painful blows from the great Lebanon, from the free fighting Yemen, and from the Iraq of civilization and glory. The drones and missiles of Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq are flying over the skies of occupied Palestine, striking important sites and targets of the enemy, draining its security and defensive capabilities, disrupting its balance, and inflicting heavy economic and military losses. It also imposes the displacement on it, displacement of its people, and closes its seaport almost completely, which is true. The Eilat seaport has been bankrupt for many months and not functioning because of the Yemeni blockade by Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces. And there's no video from Yemen this week, but let me just say that the Yemenis acknowledged 23 cruise and ballistic missiles that were fired at 3 U.S. destroyers in the Red Sea. These destroyers, $2 billion destroyers firing $1 million interceptor missiles. The U.S. Navy confirmed that they were fired on by those. And Abdel Malik al-Houthi, in his speech this week, said that there had been 860 U.S. Air Force and naval strikes on Yemen since this battle began, including 39 in the week since you last saw me, that have killed 82 and wounded 350. Israel claims some of these are intercepted. You're looking there at the Al-Arqab cruise missile. That's a long-range cruise missile that are fired from Iraq. And American forces struck the Islamic resistance in Iraq on a couple of bases, couple of their bases in Iraq. So the Americans are part of this war, attacking and defending Israel, not only when the drones are fired at Israel, but attacking outside, attacking Yemen and attacking Iraq in order to protect Israel's ability to carry out this genocide for, just a little bit longer. The 50,000 people, the conservative number of 50,000 people killed is not enough for the Americans, so they are continuing to support the Israelis in this effort, and the resistance is continuing to fight back. And the resistance this week in Abu Ubaidah's speech saluted the resilience of the population, who are themselves resisting as we heard from Abu Bakr, in many ways that are happening throughout the Gaza Strip, wherever people are in Gaza at this moment. So that is the resistance report for day 369 of the genocide in Gaza. The resistance continues. If there was no date on this show, I don't think you would be able to tell any day. And these qualitative operations look the same as they've looked all throughout the war. There's no indication of, it's of course costly, but there's no indication that the resistance is being defeated in any way, not even the smallest groups, let alone the formal operations of the Qassam Brigade. So that is the resistance report for this week.